hanging with us. That's Tone to Shields. I'm Rob Ellis. We are Sports Take, JAKIB Sports YouTube Network. We are joined right now by the man who covers the NFL. He is the AP Senior NFL writer. He is also the host of Faith on the Field. You can follow him on Twitter at Rob Maaddi. Rob, welcome to the show, my friend. How you been?
Hey, great to be here, guys. And I apologize. I'm about to go into the Tampa Bay Buccaneers availability today, which shouldn't have happened had the Eagles taken care of business. So, yeah, that's where I'm at.
The car looks nice and clean. You're good.
You're all good.
I know you just had it detailed. We're fine. No, Rob, so let's hit a couple things, man. I know you've been following all the reporting that's been going on, with the Eagles, and you have your own sources and talk to your own people. I'll just ask you, what's your sense of where this thing plays out? Because, there's been, obviously, since that Monday game which you were at, there's a lot that's gone on.
Yeah, and it was about as somber of a locker room as I've ever seen. I covered the Eagles for 22 years before I came down here to Tampa, and I've never seen anything quite like that. It was almost like you lost a member of your family. And I know part of that, guys, was the realization some of these, the core four, the Jason Kelce, the Fletcher Cox, Brandon Graham, may have played their last game. So there was a little bit of that. But I think the team was really shell-shocked at how they went from 10-1 to 1 and done and losing to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who, for as great as they played in that game, they're just a mediocre football team. And the Eagles had more talent, and they certainly didn't show it. And now all the questions about Nick Sirianni are real. Going into that game, the national perspective was, how could the Eagles make a change? He's 34-17 in the regular season. Took them to a Super Bowl last year. They've hit their bumps, but maybe they do something in the playoffs, but then they go out the way they did. All of those questions become legitimate now, and I think Jeffrey Lurie and Howie Roseman have a major decision to make, but they also have to figure out where to point the fingers, where the blame lies. It can't all be Nick Sirianni. He didn't forget how to coach. There's got to be some accountability for the front office, for the quarterback, for the players. Everyone had a piece in this, and it's something that they're going to have to figure out. But I will say this, when you look around at the list of available head coaches and the big names and the Mike Vrabels, Jim Harbaughs, we all know about Bill Belichick, and of course Pete Carroll, that's not the Eagles' MO, guys. They always go after the unknown assistant who can kind of fall within what they want to do. Howie's got full personnel control, and they want a coach who will align with that. And it's going to be a tough decision. And I wonder who made the call on defensive coordinator, because I certainly don't think that was Nick Sirianni firing a guy that he brought in or demoting a guy that he brought in. And much of the blame should lie there. So if the front office knows that they pulled the trigger on that move, then you really can't blame the coach for how that played out.
Rob, it's funny. You said it best. The Eagles are clearly at a crossroads, and whatever decision they make can shape their franchise for the next 5 to 10 years or so. Can the Eagles truly afford to jump back into the head coaching market? I mean, they don't want to become one of these teams that shuffle through head coaches every 3 to 5 years, right?
And some folks feel that, how could you, if you fire a coach, who would want to come here knowing that you just moved on from Doug Peterson a few years after he won a Super Bowl? You fire a guy who's 34-17 and had success and took you to the playoffs. But I kind of feel like there's 32 jobs, guys, out there. You will be able to find a head coach. Look at the names. Look at the list of candidates. Look who's unemployed. Someone will want to come here. It just comes down to, who do you want to bring in? Do you stick by your organizational philosophy where the general manager has all the power, and therefore someone with clout, someone with some cachet, someone like Vrabel and Carroll and Belichick, they're not going to want to be in a situation like this, and that's where you have to end up going and bringing in the younger assistant coaches who may not have too many other options. Ben Johnson's going to get a ton of interviews. He's a hot name. I'm about to go in here in a few minutes, and we're going to talk to Dave Canales, the offensive coordinator for the Buccaneers. Guys, he fits the Eagles mold, right? He's a guy who is a young, up-and-coming offensive coordinator who's had a tremendous amount of success with quarterbacks. Look what he did with Baker Mayfield this year, what he did with Geno Smith last year, what he did previously with Russell Wilson. He's not going to come in and demand any kind of power. He fits with what they're going to do. But if you're going to make that change, why not stick with Nick Sirianni and figure out the offensive coordinator and defensive coordinator positions? My concern is being in that locker room and giving guys a chance to endorse Nick in the heat of the moment. I know what they said yesterday, when you had time to think about it, when you had time to read the headlines and the columns and see the buzz on social media. But in that moment on Monday night, when Jalen Hurts had that opportunity, he didn't endorse. He deflected. When other guys had it, a few guys which stood up for Nick, but it wasn't quite as strong and as powerful as I would have hoped or would have thought I would see from this team.
Rob, then let me, and I agree. And I thought Jalen was sort of lukewarm even yesterday. I mean, and part of that, I know he's not a real effusive guy. I get it, but I thought it was sort of lukewarm yesterday. Does this play out very similarly, and you were here then covering the team, that it does for Doug? Like, in other words, if Nick goes in there and says, hey, I'm willing to listen, man. I get this was ugly, and let's make this a collaborative group effort to figure out the best way to go about this with assistant coaches and going forward. He's safe. If he pushes back at all, do you think he's gone?
I think it could very well play out that way, Rob. And he doesn't have the Super Bowl ring that Doug Peterson had, so he can't go in there and demand, hey, I want it this way, I want it that way. You got there, you got close, but you didn't win it. There was no parade on Broad Street. Only Doug Peterson and Nick Foles brought you that. So if the owner and the general manager want to have input on your offensive coordinator and defensive coordinator, and keep in mind, I believe they did on a defensive coordinator decision.
I agree with you 100%.
In season. I just can't see a head coach making that move. These guys are loyal to their assistants, and especially in a moment like that. I think that's the only way at this point where we can foresee Nick coming back. Hey, the best thing that happened to the Eagles in the past 3 days is the Dallas Cowboys bringing back Mike McCarthy. The Cowboys bringing back Mike McCarthy makes me take a step back and look at it like that team's not. They may win another 12 games next year. They're not going to go anywhere. You can compete with them. The NFC East goes back and forth anyway, so they're not going to repeat as division winners. You can bring Nick in and fix this thing. But if Jeffrey and Howie feel that those players who didn't stand on the table, like Jalen Hurts isn't going anywhere. He got $255 million. If Jalen Hurts, and he should have some input in this decision, if you sit him down and he doesn't feel that Nick Sirianni is going to be able to help him get to that Super Bowl level again and be elite again, then that's where maybe you have to make that difficult, hard decision. Jalen took a step back this year. How much is on Nick? How much is on Brian Johnson? How much is it that Shane Steichen left? And how much is it on the quarterback himself? Because at the end of the day, he had two 1,000-yard receivers, a 1,000-yard rusher, and his numbers and his overall performance went down.
You know, we briefly touched on it, right? The fact that this whole thing, as much as we try to, piece together all the, the webs of it all, I think it hinges solely on if Jalen Hurts believes he can get him to the next level or not. And when you invest $250 million into a guy, you're gonna value his opinion. So I think that's the most fascinating part about it. What do you think was the genesis of their issues? Again, this team, they were just at the mountaintop, quite literally at the mountaintop. Did they get the trophy or not? No, but they were just there. And Jalen Hurts has some astronomical growth from 2021 to 2022, took a step back in 2023. Again, they've won a lot, but these past 7 games are undeniable. Where did this truly begin for you throughout the season?
It's hard to go back to a Super Bowl after you lose it. We know the history of the teams who've done that and how difficult it is the next year. And for the Eagles to get out to a 10-1 start the way they did, I thought was very remarkable. Now, there were games along the way in that stretch where they very well could have lost. The Buffalo game, the Dallas game where they self-destructed, the Cowboys did inside the 10. And some of those, you come out of them going, all right, they haven't played to their standard, but they're still 10-1. And when they get to their standard, they're going to take off. Well, they never got there. And maybe those, we should have seen that along the way. And Obviously, losing the offensive coordinator and defensive coordinator were major factors in what happened here. But other teams have been able to adjust. Look at Buffalo. They're 6-6 after losing to the Eagles. They switch offensive coordinators, and then they take off. So Josh Allen was able to adjust. I thought the transition to Brian Johnson would go seamlessly because of the relationship with Jalen. What concerns me is that in talking to other teams, other players, defensive coordinators, still, this is 2 years later, and despite Jalen's meteoric climb last year, I still hear, take away his first read, and you beat him. And you look at the difficulty that they had with the blitz, and I understand there's all parts in that. There's a lot of scheme that goes in there. Part of that is Jason Kelce and the offensive line. You're the center. You got to, you got to be on the same page with your quarterback. Your quarterback's got to be able to check out if they don't have the protection that they need. But ultimately, you're the one with the ball in your hand and have to make that decision where to go with it. And when I hear that from other players around the league, it's consistent. It's take away his first read. That's Nick Bosa talked about the blueprint to beat Jalen Hurts. The Eagles haven't adjusted to that, and they weren't able to make those in-season adjustments, which is deeply concerning. And that's where you have to try and figure out where do you ultimately point the blame and the finger, and if it's all pieces, how do you fix it?
All right, Rob. So I guess my follow-up to that would be if first, it's two-part. One, do you think it will be both coordinators? In other words, whatever the decide Patricia thing is gone, do you think Brian Johnson would be gone as well? This is assuming Nick sticks around. And if they do that, will they look to go the veteran route or the up-and-comer route? A guy who's maybe a senior offensive assistant somewhere, for example. How do you think it shakes out with what the directions they generally like to go?
I think both guys, if Nick stays, I think both guys will end up going. And it's undeniable that they took a step back with Brian Johnson as the offensive coordinator. This is a guy who a few years ago I thought was on his way to becoming a head coach, guys. I thought that Brian Johnson could leapfrog offensive coordinator and go straight from quarterbacks coach to head coach. And I thought that after last year and the success that Jalen had under his tutelage. And I've heard Brian Johnson sitting in on some of the NFL quarterback summits, they call them, where they got the young coaches and they do these different interviews. And I've had the privilege of sitting in and heard his presentation. And he was always so impressive to me as a candidate. So I thought the best case scenario for the Eagles would be if someone were to hire him and then you get you lose him, you don't have to fire him, you get some draft picks and all of that stuff. That certainly doesn't look like it's going to happen. So now you're going to have to make that difficult decision. But there's that relationship between Brian Johnson and Jalen Hurts. And how much of Jalen, we saw the ESPN report, right, where he wasn't happy with the direction of the offense. Is that Jalen's indictment on the offensive coordinator or the head coach, a combination? That's where it comes down to Jeffrey and Howie sitting down with the quarterback and figuring out where his mind's at.
You talked about the balancing of player accountability with the coaching accountability, right? And I think that's the hardest part about this season to really digest. Where did it go wrong? Who do we put most of the blame with? A.J. Brown said in one of his press conferences that, we play, it's on us. But then I asked myself, okay, this team has a lot of veterans on it, a lot of pros, a lot of decorated guys, Pro Bowls, all pros. Where's the level of accountability amongst you guys, right? Where's the desire to be great amongst you guys? And if you guys can't motivate yourselves, that's a dark place to be. And then I'm looking at the head coach. Okay, if you can't motivate these guys and you guys they've won under your leadership, how did they crash so fast? How do you balance? Or where do you put most of the blame if you had to choose? Do you put more on player accountability or more on coaching accountability?
So obviously I'm not in the locker room every day like I used to be, but from afar, I see some selfishness and a me first attitude in some of these guys. And I think that was displayed in the way AJ handled some things, the way Slay, was it after the Cowboys game where he said, I played well, the trash can and the fans outside, and he said, I played well, but my team stunk. Like, you can't do that. You can't say that. You can't have any kind, if there is any kind of me first perception other players in the locker room pick up on it. And no matter how great you perform on the field, if you have that hanging over you, if people see that as part of who you are, your makeup, your package. Listen, wide receivers are well known for being divas, and that's great when they're out there performing. But if things go bad, that's when things can get really ugly. And I think that's where you go back to, well, who made some of these decisions on Slay, on Bradbury, whose tackling was horrific, was just poor effort, right? That goes back to accountability for the GM, the linebacker decisions, letting TJ Edwards walk, not really solidifying those positions, counting on some of the older veterans to stabilize the defensive line while the younger guys are up and coming. These are all decisions that fall under the front office and Howie Roseman. So I don't think you can absolve anyone of blaming this. When you collapse as poorly, as abysmal as this team played, you have to point the finger at there's a comment. You got to look at the head coach. You got to look at the players. You got to look at the front office. You got to look at everyone. There's no one whose hands are clean in something like this when it goes down.
Rob,
Ellis,
do you think?
If I can quickly follow up, Ellis, I'm sorry. Can I quickly follow up? Okay, Nick Sirianni stays, right? They get him 2 new coordinators. Okay, but what happens when they decide to leave? What happens when they decide to elevate and want to be a head coach or whatever, or maybe a career change, whatever it is? You get them two new coordinators. They eventually leave. Now we're back to square one, continuing to question Nick Sirianni's ability. I mean, at some point, the Philadelphia Eagles got to ask themselves, how comfortable are they with Nick Sirianni's limitations as a head coach? I mean, what's your thoughts on that notion?
And Rob had asked me a little bit earlier about the offensive coordinator, defensive. Do you go older route? I think a Frank Reich, as soon as he was fired by Carolina, everybody in Philly, I'm sure, was like, Frank Reich, he can come in and save the day, and he's won a Super Bowl as an offensive coordinator. And he kind of indicated after losing his job that he might be done as a coach. I know his relationship with Nick. I know what that friendship is like. And I think if anyone can get the fire burning inside Frank to come back, it would be Nick. In fact, I'm going to give him a call later on today because I want to hear from Frank himself if that's something that he would be interested. He got paid very well to be a head coach in Carolina, lost his job. He's got a lot of money coming to him. Is that something that he would want to do at the age that he's at right now? I think that that's something that they can do. And then if you brought in, Tony, if you bring in a veteran like that, I don't anticipate he's going to go anywhere. I don't think he'll get another head coaching job. And then it just depends on how this team can bounce back next year. I think back to when the Eagles bounced the Buccaneers out of the playoffs 2 years in a row, 2 decades ago, right? And they fired Tony Dungy and brought in John Gruden, and he came in and led them to a Super Bowl, beat the Eagles, closed out the vet. We all know the Joe Jaravicious game and Aronde and all that stuff, right? They had a first-year head coach in John Gruden, who obviously had a ton of experience, but they were able to make a transition and go win a Super Bowl. I wonder if the Eagles think that way and go. That's where a guy like Vrabel comes in. You make a transition to someone, but again, Howie, Jeffrey, a guy who would like power, who would like clout. That was his issue, and that's how he lost his job in Tennessee with Vrabel. Are they going to give that to him? Is Howie going to go in a broom closet again on the other side of the building? I just can't see Jeffrey Lurie doing it. This is a very difficult decision, and it's also complicated knowing their MO, knowing their history, what we feel they need, what we think they need, but then balancing that with what they've usually their trends.
So, Rob, I want to follow up on the Howie part of this. In your opinion, is Jeffrey able to look at it objectively enough, and maybe himself too, to some of the shortcomings that have happened this year, as opposed to just laying it all on Nick? Do you think there's some soul searching going on, and maybe, hey, philosophically, maybe we do need to pour more resources in the linebackers. We do need to look at this a little bit differently. Do you think they're capable and willing of doing that?
Capable and willing the hope is that they would be capable and willing. I wonder how capable and willing they are when I think back to Doug Peterson and how that ended. when the blame is all put. This is the only guy who ever took you to a Super Bowl, and they couldn't wait to get rid of him because they didn't want to give him any power. They didn't want to give him any clout. And Howie's done a tremendous job throughout his decades plus with the Eagles. And one of his greatest assets is his self-preservation, controlling the narrative, knowing how to make sure that the information being filtered out of the NovaCare Center kind of puts the blame at other people's doorstep, whether it's the old quarterback, old head coach, the new coach, the whoever it may be. And they're really great at doing that. So I think, Rob, it would take change in strategy, thinking, philosophy for the Eagles, for Jeffrey and Howie to kind of come to that realization that maybe part of this is really our organizational philosophy and what we're doing here. And we got to take a hard look. However, Jeffrey did that before, right? Jeffrey has moved on from Joe Banner, a lifelong friend, and he did put Howie in that broom closet for a year, as Jason Kelce says, to give Chip Kelly all the power. So he has done it. How much is he willing? How much are they willing to really look in the mirror and come to those tough, difficult, hard decisions about themselves?
Last one from me, Rob. Appreciate you for coming on. I'm curious to know, you've been around the block. You covered this whole league. How much do you believe of Jalen Hurts' reputation has been damaged based off of this season's performance, but also most notably the playoff performance against the Bucs this season, and also how he's been handling these press conferences as it pertains to Nick Sirianni and whether he comes back or not? How much of his reputation do you believe has been damaged, if at all?
I think winning cures everything, and no matter what your personality looks like, if you go out there and you perform and you win, nobody cares. But if you don't get the job done, that's where people start trying to figure out and to poke fingers and to point fingers at, well, he's a quiet guy, he's stoic, he shows no emotion, he's this, he's that, he's the other thing, whatever it may be with Jalen. I think he's going to have to reflect in this offseason, and I think he indicated that about how he leads next year. But it's hard to change who you are as a person and as a leader, because you don't want to come across as being phony. You don't want to come across as being a guy who is playing for the cameras or trying to fit into an image that other people want you to be. Jalen is who he is, and it worked in 2022, and it didn't in 2023, and it's unfortunate. He's going to take some shots. I would bet on Jalen. I didn't think, when people were asking me in the offseason, is this going to be the year he takes a step back? I said, hey, what have you seen in his career that would suggest that? I thought there's nothing that indicated a downward slide. I thought it was all upward trajectory even after last year. I was wrong. Doesn't mean he can't bounce back from this, but he's got to be surrounded by the right coaching staff and the right mindset. And I think I was bothered a little bit by some of the comments, not that he made them, but that he felt that way when you're talking about teammates not being all in and teammates not. There's a problem there, and some of those teammates got to look in the mirror.
All right, Rob, last one, and thanks for all this time, man. And we know you got to get in there. I know I saw you tweet about the Jason Kelce thing, where he essentially should be given the ability to call this thing on his own terms, and it was, kind of prematurely reported, and he refuted it on his podcast, saying, I didn't tell anybody anything. Guys might have read into body language or whatever, but I didn't say anything. What do you think happens there? And walk us through how the reporting of that goes.
Yeah, and I was in that locker room, and we were part of the reporting too. The AP, we also based on what we were told, what I was told by different sources, different people. But I thought that there was a respect level from the media in that locker room. I think we understood, we realized what was happening there, and we want to give Jason the opportunity to do this on his own terms. And then when you see, I guess it was ESPN first reported it, and then NFL Network reported it after that, and you go out there and say, well, they did it. We know this information. We can confirm it, and we can put it out there too as well. Jason's been known to go back and forth on this decision. It's been a tough decision for him. I think ultimately he has played his last game. I think the people that he told or indicated that to felt that way. Certainly it looked that way. And I do think when he's ready to make that decision and give that speech and make that announcement, I think we should allow him to have his moment. But I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up coming back. But guys, retirement is so difficult. We said Brett Favre, Michael Jordan, Tom Brady, they all went back and forth. If Jason wants to change his mind in 3 weeks or 3 months, hey, why not? Everybody wants him back anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. Rob, good stuff, man. Follow Rob at Rob Maaddi. Check out his work at the AP. He's the senior NFL writer, and of course his show Faith on the Field as well. Rob, good stuff, man. Always great catching up with you. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Rob. Appreciate it.
You got it. Take care, guys.
All right. That's Rob Maaddi there. Awesome stuff there. Really insightful.
Yeah, right, for sure. Definitely.
Get a timeout. We'll come back. And we're going to dig into the biggest personnel challenges that the Eagles have in front of them, Tone. I'll give you an example. Like, how do you get Jalen back to where he was? How do you upgrade the back seven? Why did the defensive line disappear the way it did? How are these things fixed? So we're going to dig into some of the big kind of meatier personnel issues.
Well, this is what you got to do, Rob. You got to fire Nick Sirianni, of course. So I'm kidding.
All right. So we'll talk. And again, this stuff is happening fast and furious, man.
Mm-hmm.
If we hear anything, we'll let you know where it's at. So we'll get into all that when we come back. Don't go anywhere. That's Tone. I'm Rob. We're Sports Take, JAKIB Sports YouTube Network. Let me tell you about Jim Murray and Principal Financial Group, because knowing who to trust with your finances is challenging, right? It's hard. I found the right person, and I'm going to tell you, it is Jim Murray and Principal Financial Group. Whether it's retirement planning, 401k review, insurance review, you're trying to get employee benefits off the ground with a new business that you have, really anything. If you're not really sure about something, just reach out. I've entrusted my IRA, my 401k rollovers with Jim, and I couldn't be any happier. You will be as well. Give him a call right now, 610-996-4751, 610-996-4751. You could also email him as well, Murray, Murray.Jim@principal.com. That's Murray.